What up, big dog? Can you hear me, Corey? Oh, you're on mute.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Perfect.
cool, man. You doing all right?
Doing good. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing better. Much better. Been a busy day, right? I got some good news to share with you, but we'll talk about that later, though. Um,
Cool.
yeah, finally turned out to be okay, though.
We got a
But
pretty good class here.
yeah, more will be rolling in. It's in recording.
All right.
Then
Go ahead and make sure.
Siobhan's keeping tabs on us. You met Siobhan, right?
Yes.
Yeah, she's right there.
Hello.
Keep yeah, keep your eye on
Yep,
her
I'm
though.
here. I'm in the
She's
car, so
trouble.
it's raining outside, so I'm gonna be on mute.
She's got direct connection with the dean, so just be careful.
I'll be on my best P's and Q's.
Yes, thank you. All right, folks. Good evening. How y'all doing? Hope y'all are staying safe inside. Right? It's a stormy. I mean, it just came all of a sudden, And I know the umbrellas started flying, so the wife's like, "You better get out there and get everything secured." So I'm inside now. And I want to welcome Corey. Corey and I worked together since what, 2007, Corey? I think we've known each other since 2007 at
Yep.
WorldPay. A lot of things have changed, right? I
I
know
got a
when we
beard now.
start, you got a beard, right? You look like the guy from, I forgot what that, I mean, I can say so many things, right? You look like one of the singers
Yeah.
that I know, a rapper. So Corey, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to join us. I appreciate that.
Happy
And
to.
over the years, we've seen a lot of changes, especially in the security side and fintech, right, and in the payment side. And when we started, we were just starting to implement EMV, the chip card, right, as part of the
Right.
secure feature. So if you want to elaborate, talk about the before, the during, and the after, right? So if you want to just go ahead and start talking about that, and students, class, feel free to stop Corey and ask questions or raise your hands. We will he much obliged to engage with the students. Okay, go ahead, Corey.
So when I started out, I started in payment processing. It was physical cards. So you had the plastic cards. EMV was even a new technology. That's the little chip that you have on each one of your cards now. That's RFID technology, or excuse me, NFC technology, where it's transmitting certain tags and elements. Even that was really new at the time. It first came in the late 90s. So a lot of credit card fraud back then was a little bit more direct. You would have problems with stolen cards, people getting cards out of people's mailboxes, or you would have skimming at the actual ATMs and such. That was a very big fraud, what I would call a fraud vector. So cybersecurity was a lot more about preventing stuff like man-in-the-middle attacks and going ahead and making sure that the actual card itself was secure. The card numbers were created through what's called a Mod 10 algorithm. So making sure the card numbers weren't being created were fake. These were all things that were looked upon back in the day of credit card processing.
Mm-hmm.
Even the simplest one, Nick and anybody in the industry would know about knuckle busters. That's back in the day where you would have a carbon slip and you would just simply do an imprint of the card just to
Mm-hmm.
show, hey, the physical card was at the location. So very simplistic security, even up till the 2000s. EMV was the big game changer in the physical card space.
Yes.
Uh,
So,
the Go ahead, Nick.
so I remember 2013. So I was invited to go to Midtown, Bucket actually.
Mhm.
Mastercard had this big conference. They were launching EMV. So if you recall, Mastercard was the first guys to go ahead and start implementing the chip, right? They were the ones who
Exactly.
initiated. So I remember when we went there, we had a whole day of seminar in Bucket. So Mastercard was pushing for chip and pin, just like how it's in Europe and Asia, right? The security features, that's what they've been pushing for,
And
and that's
just to
what they want.
explain that, chip and pin, everyone, is where you actually have to insert the chip card into a machine and then at the same time type a pin number in for security.
Yes.
So you have double the factor of security. You have the chip and you have the pin. Go ahead,
Mhm.
Nick.
So, and then along comes Visa, right? So Visa says, hey guys, this is going to be trouble because our market is so big, especially US market, that we don't want the pin feed functionality. And of course,
Right.
you got the battle of the two giants, right? You got the two big guys banging heads. So of course, who prevails? Visa, at the end. So that's
Right.
where they said no more chip and pin. We're just going to go chip and max drive. But you and I realized with the max drive, right? The whole idea to get away from max drive is
It's
because of,
exactly what I just said it before. And what we're really getting into is the reason why you want to get away from technology such as when we say mag stripe, that's the magnetic strip on the back of the card. It contains very basic data points such as the actual card number, where the card was created, if it can be used internationally or domestically, those type of things.
Mhm.
That's the even before we get into stuff like generative AI and such, even back in the late 2000s, it was very easy to go ahead and hack that information, whether
So
you get it off the dark web or you skim it. So having that mag stripe even still on the card is a vulnerability.
exactly. So you remember when we did tests in the labs and stuff. So what the criminals used to do is they used to zap the chip, right? Just stick it in the
Right.
microwave for like 10 seconds. So that'll zap the chip. And of course, your fail safe is what? You have to go to Mac. So
Mag
at the
stripe.
end, yeah. So basically, it didn't solve the problem for us, right? I mean, if you look at it. So
It
what?
didn't solve completely, but what it
Mhm.
did was EMV, just to let the group know, EMV stands for EuroPay, MasterCard, Visa. So MasterCard and Visa were absolute partners right from the outset with creating that standard.
Mhm.
And it's actually at this point 30 years old, back from the 90s.
Yes.
But when chip came in, that provided enough security where it was inconvenient to go ahead and actually just simply skim cards or go ahead and steal card data, at least for in person. It's much harder now to go ahead for a chip card when properly implemented. That's one of the things we'll discuss later on, proper implementation, going ahead and make sure you cover all your bases. But when you're properly implementing chip, it is so secure that the network actually provides a liability shift to merchants who actually utilize chip correctly.
Mhm.
A liability shift, in other words, that if something is fraudulent, they'll protect the merchant if they just simply utilize EMV and chip. So at that point, we got to a point about 2018 or so, Nick, I would say, where
Yeah.
card present fraud started trending downward. And card present, physical brick mortar,
Mhm.
it continues to trend downward with chip implementation. Not a perfect system, like Nick said. If you defeat the chip itself, we're still falling back to magnetic stripe. Also, if the chip fails, or if someone actually makes counterfeit chips, in other words, where it's missing some of the data but enough to initiate the transaction, that also can occur. But for the most part, chip and card present fraud has been going down consistently over the last couple of years. The problem is that e-commerce happened.
Yeah. So you're talking about CNP, right? Card not present. So class,
Card
that's
not
what we
present.
call. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we call that CNPs. Okay. So all right.
So
Correct.
we're seeing in the industry and payment processing, which kind of gets into cybersecurity tonight, card not present, omni-channel, that's where you have both brick and mortar and online presence, as well as a lot of different cases where we're even seeing data just simply made up, manufactured card holders, where they go ahead and take certain information, such as a valid address, a valid card holder name, maybe, or they have a social security number, and they simply create a card holder using different stolen information. In addition, fraud is not like back in the day where you had pockets of professionals but you would think of them the person with the hood on, the person that maybe at most is working with organized crime group. It's a small little group. Now, because of the internet, it has connected via the dark web, via cryptocurrency, because you can have untraceable funds, so many different means of communication between criminals. It's a business now. One where I believe, let me go ahead and pull this up just to go ahead and, you know me, I like my stats, but it's, yep, 79% of a merchants that were interviewed by Clover found that they had increased malware attacks. 75 are seeing phishing. And the fraud industry, I will call it industry, is stealing over $1 trillion from merchants per year.
Yeah. So, Corey, let's jump into the conversation. We nearly lost our license. Remember back in the days, right?
Yes.
So we had an attack by the Russians, correct? On the gift
Correct.
space, yes. So this happened at WorldPay, folks. I just want to let y'all know that. So the Russians were
Top
able
10 in
to,
Wired Magazine's 20
yes.
crimes of the 2000s. So,
And
yes,
this was an attack carried out by the Russians with what, 40 people, I think, something like
40
that.
people, 40
Yeah.
runners.
Yep. And loss of millions of dollars. And then we nearly lost our license at WorldPay. And we had to pay PwC Price Waterhouse what $200 an hour for about how many people? I mean, I think who came to do audits and stuff. So
Right.
it was, yeah, they came through the back door, folks. It's
And
not
the
just, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. You
back
can talk
door,
to me.
and on top of it, they acted like a business. They hired runners to go ahead and go to ATMs and use stolen card data in order to go ahead and withdraw money. But the people who they hired had no idea of the organized crime group behind the actual attack. They had set schedules for their runners. They made sure that they were coordinated, synced up, the money was delivered, and that they had no idea where the money was going, even before cryptocurrency. So that just goes to show you the amount of organization that can happen with these crimes. Also, when Chip first came out, we had about an $8 million hit on an ATM, group of ATMs in a casino. And it was the same thing. They were able to understand the way the cards worked. They studied the way EMV worked. They made sure the cards went into a fail safe. And at that point, they withdrew funds. So it goes to show you that these groups are organized. And when you work in cybersecurity, that means that you have to treat it in that manner. You have to be organized. You have to have a comprehensive, holistic approach that's both proactive. And if it is reactive, it's reactive in a manner that is quick and you get straight into investigating what occurred. That is very important.
So, Corey, do you want to talk about the functionality of the cards like CVVs and all of that if you want to
Sure.
talk to them about it? Okay.
So, I already mentioned some of the first ones, the very basic ones. Original cards had certain codes on it, like a service code. It tells you where the card was actually created. It tells you if the card's capable of being swiped everywhere. Um, but then you get into verification codes, card verification code, CVC, or card verification value, CVV.
Mhm.
So there's several different values on the card in different places. CVV1 was the original one. It was also in that magnetic strip. CVV2 is the 3-digit code on the back of your card. So when that number on the back of your card that they always tell you do not give out to anybody, that is a 3-digit code that's specific to your card number created via algorithm. And that is communicated when the card is inserted to the bank. And that way they can verify that you are the card holder at least. So CVV2 comes in when there's no physical card. In addition, there's on the EMV chip, there's several different tags that create checksums that use cryptography. There's what's called offline data authentication, where it actually goes ahead and looks at the chip, does an algorithm to check that the actual data on the chip is the same as what we have stored on our side. So there is let's see, even on a chip itself, a chip on the card, when you insert it, it's kind of like a mini computer in that it goes ahead and uses the voltage from the machine in order to activate and then start transmitting information to the machine. So the chip itself is a security feature. That, along with many other security features, contactless, when you use your card in a contactless manner or when you put your phone against the machine, more information is transmitted also at that point in order to go ahead and make sure that the machine knows which form factor it is. If there's the card is or the transaction's actually in order from the last business you went to, all these things happen and it happens passively. So this is all before you do a PIN number or you have to enter any information in. So that's all the features on the card itself or the form factor, Nick. In addition, banks or payment processors on their end, they make sure to see, okay, are you making purchases in the area that you should be? Are you traveling? If is the card being used, and at the same time, the last purchase you made, you used your phone for some reason, or you're using a card and it hasn't been activated yet. So we'll talk about AI later, but this is the reason why so many executives love AI, because all these different data points come in and they need to organize it and then also cross-reference it against other data points to make sure whether fraud is occurring or not.
So, Corey, based on what you've seen so far, right, is it safer to just to use the phone versus your credit card, your card itself, or debit card? Sorry.
Right now, it's a no-brainer, unfortunately. Card present is the safest, just simply because it is a physical card. In addition, contactless is the safest. Is also very safe. Even if you don't enter your PIN, contactless actually now uses the same data that an EMV card would use. So it uses certain points from the transaction itself, plus it does what's called tokenization, which I believe we'll be talking in a separate session about that.
Yes, but we've got a separate section just for that. Yes.
Tokenization, where the card information, not only the card information, but extremely important data points throughout the transaction are tokenized and sent in to the card issuer, and that way they can go ahead and decrypt on their side, detokenize, and you're not even sending elements over the basically in the wild or in the clear. So there's so many different ways of protecting a physical transaction. It's almost gotten into a point where it doesn't make sense to go ahead and attack physical transactions. But we've also gotten to a point where we're seeing a crossover now where more transactions are occurring online online via the internet than offline. We're even getting into the days of agentic AI, where both Visa and MasterCard are trying to create systems where automated payments would occur without any human intervention. So that's the reason why I would say physical transactions are more safe.
Okay.
But at the same time, unfortunately, they're becoming less and less, and we are going to have to focus on how to make those online transactions just as safe.
Okay. So I'm going to pause here for a second. Class, do you all have any questions?
Don't be shy.
Any comments, questions? So, Corey, do you want to talk about the match program with the MasterCard?
Yes.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
Go ahead, Cable.
Yeah, so it was interesting how you talked about how back in the day the crime organizations were, a bit more crazy with, credit card fraud. Just tell me a little bit about what you're seeing now in terms of fraud. How are groups organizing themselves, and also what ways are they trying to access sensitive data?
So it's a really good point to say back in the day it's more wild. I'd say that it was more siloed. you still had that old school. If you operate in New York, you have that territory. You can go ahead and try to hit all the gas stations in New York and such. What you now see is that the internet, because of its networking ability for information, it's created marketplaces
Mm-hmm.
where people are specializing in different ways or different information being provided. So back in the day, data breaches were so much more devastating because a lot of that information just wasn't out there. I remember when I would first had my account for PlayStation Network, and the news hit, and it was like Sony got hacked and they had a massive data breach, and at that time it was like, oh wow, this is horrible. Like my information's out there, my credit card information. Nowadays, there are so many different data breaches that occur, and that information immediately gets to the dark web that I'm almost not even worried about it, to be honest. I go ahead and make sure I have my credit report on tap. I make sure I lock my credit scores. I go ahead and check to make sure accounts are doing what they should do. And that's the same thing that happened on the payment processor end. A lot
Mm-hmm.
more attention has been made towards reactive work. For instance, the darknet, the reason why those companies that sell you services where they say, we'll find your information on the darknet, they literally mean that. That's all they're doing is they're trolling all these different marketplaces to see if your information comes up in one of these sales on the darknet. So yeah, it's more, I hate to see use that word, but it's more collaborative
Yeah.
fraud these days.
So let me interject, Caleb. I'm just going to tell you, add to that, right? When I worked for Elavon, I was doing more forensic work, right? So I don't know whether Corey, I told you that too, that I work with law enforcement quite a lot, Secret Service, FinCEN, Department of Treasury, right?
Yep.
I'd worked with all those guys, FBI. I got all the subpoenas, right? That's what I did. I saw a lot of fraud rings, right? I mean, huge. So they were located in Russia. We had one in LA, Europe.
Right.
Yeah, so it was organized, but to a different scale, not like now, right? These guys are even two steps ahead of us. But those days it was a bit different. But one thing, Corey, and the class, they anything less than a certain amount, we don't prosecute. We don't. Because by the time they pay us to mine the data and do all the work, it's not worth it. Companies do not go for more than $30,000, $40,000. They don't even touch it, right, Corey? I mean, if you look at
It's
it,
it
small
kind of
scale is,
goes
yeah, go ahead.
it really goes to like for instance, we're talking about big scale fraud, we're talking about
Yeah.
organized rings and such, but some of the hardest fraud to stop are the romance scams or
Mhm.
the scams where people go ahead and if you get a text and someone just says, hey, how you doing, and you don't recognize the number, don't answer that,
Yeah.
because that's a certain type of scam where, and a lot of times people think, well, I'm smart, the people who fall for these things are stupid. Well, if you really look up on account takeover scams or romance scams or cryptocurrency scams, a lot of times people are very smart people. They're professors, they're doctors, they're even bankers and people in the finance industry. But vishing, voice phishing, smishing, so SMS texting, where you go ahead and send random text and then you get to know the person. A lot of times, people talk to these scammers for over a year via text, and then they happen to just go ahead and say, "Hey, I got an investment opportunity." Not
Yeah.
saying I need money or anything. I got an investment opportunity. Pig butchering is one of the basically what I'm describing here, but these type of scams happen, and although they're smaller, like Nick said, or they happen on platforms like Venmo or Zelle, where the transaction, once it occurs, it's official. And that type of fraud is some of the hardest to recover from, and the money
Yeah.
is instantly gone. So you're seeing also old tactics. Going back to your question, Caleb, you're seeing old tactics being adjusted for the new age and for the way that the technology works now.
Hmm.
And the problem is that unfortunately, with capitalism, modern capitalism, part of it is that deregulation occurs, and there's not a lot of regulation. So another thing to take away from this discussion is that fraud has to be proactive. You have to proactively protect yourself, protect weak points like any type of external connections. You have to actually plan to be more compliant than the actual regulations. Uh, just because the speed limit's 55 miles per hour doesn't mean that you're going to do 55 miles per hour in a thunderstorm. You're going to slow down and make sure that you're careful and don't crash. It's the same thing here. Just because some standards are done by Visa MasterCard to protect your transactions, Visa MasterCard doesn't require that authentication I talked about earlier, 3DS, where they make sure you're the card holder on an offline transaction. They don't require it. It is required in Europe, I believe, certain African countries and certain Asian countries. But here in the United States, it's not required. But I saw a merchant today who lost over $100,000 on something that could have been protected for $50. So that's fraud. Fraud, you have to be proactive because once the money's gone, a lot of times, even if you have avenues to recover, it's very hard to recover. And you can't just simply rely on the regulation to tell you how hard you need to protect or how much you need to do to protect your systems. Took a moment to breathe there, Nick.
Oh, sorry. Hold on a second. So, yeah, we have a question here. What are the preventative measures you have been taking to respond to hackers and scammers using AI? So that's a question by Dennis. Yeah.
So I'm going to tell you a little bit of a secret. AI is not new. Matter of fact, just like the internet was created by the Defense Department, or not created solely, but it was funded initially by DARPA in our United States military. The same thing happened with AI in the late 50s. There's a great YouTube channel called Asianometry. I would recommend to anyone in this discussion who wants to learn more about how AI was created. And it gives direct sources to stuff you can pull up in Galileo. So this is something that I would recommend on YouTube. But AI was developed pretty much over the last 60 years or so. As a matter of fact, there was an AI boom in the 80s using what's called Lisp systems, LISP, forerunner to Python programming. So in our industry, matter of fact, AI has always been around. We produce, Nick can tell you, text files that are over, I would say, a gigabyte or so every single day, each cycle from Visa and MasterCard. So not just the credit card data, but all the cardholder authentications, where the transactions occur, what the product is in some cases is actually transmitted via what's called level 3 data. All these data points, there's so much that it can't simply just be looked at from human eyes. So there's been, for over 30 years at least, algorithms and programs to look at credit card transactions and see, okay, does this fit a certain pattern? And then they get assigned what's called a fraud score from the network. And that fraud score would tell you, okay, go ahead and approve no problem, challenge the transaction, or go ahead and stop and have the cardholder call in.
Yeah. So MasterCard had that, right? Match. So remember when if you go pump gas at Bankhead Highway, so chances are that's a high risk area.
Oh well, match is for the merchant, like when you have a merchant that you want to report. But safety net is what you're talking about, where safety net goes ahead and it also looks for what's called enumeration attacks. Enumeration is where you create card data, or you go ahead and try cards basically in a what's called a brute force attack. You just send a whole bunch of data. You're trying to see which ones work. They usually attack websites that have less security, where you can make guest logins, for instance.
Mhm.
and they just try to see which card numbers work. Or if you've gotten a whole bunch of cards off the dark web, you do $0 authorizations just to see if the data is correct. So, um, saying that they've gone ahead and started and also, excuse me, generated identification. So identification where cardholders information is taken, such as valid addresses. And instead of going ahead and stealing the information from that person's address, they simply create a cardholder, create a good background, so credit scores and such, using other people's social security numbers, for instance. And then that person becomes just a regular person. They go ahead and maybe get a mortgage, or they open up a bank account with minimum, amount in there. But they're able to start processing using stolen data, even though we're not even looking for an actual person. So the criminals are starting to use AI. They're using AI in order to go ahead and do simple testing in order to go ahead and see if they can get into your systems. On our side, we go ahead and also do transaction laundering detection using AI. Uh, Transaction laundering is when you have what looks like a legitimate site, but you're actually selling products or services that are illegal. So, for instance, you're selling you go to your website, and on the website, you might be selling something as like toys, Hot Wheels, or something like that. But each Hot Wheel, instead of it actually being a Hot Wheel, it's a certain product, like illegal products, illegal drugs, narcotics. It might be gambling chips. It might be CSA content. So unfortunately, abuse. All these things are very hard with just humans to go ahead and detect. But with artificial intelligence and using historic information, you can now, from these generative AI, develop models where you can actually go ahead and look to find websites that are actually transaction laundering. And this is not future content. This is stuff that's here right now. So if you're interested in AI, then cybersecurity is definitely one of those places where it's not theoretical, it's actually practical application of database technology and also artificial intelligence.
All right. Any other questions, folks? So, Corey, what's the future now? What do we see? Where do we see with security features in the future? Especially now we're
Uh,
using more on the phones, right? That's the
right.
device that we're using to pay, and everything is done on the phone.
Authentication is the future. A lot of things that we talked about previously was on the authorization side of a transaction. So when you
Mhm.
send that card data, what the transaction amount is going to be, who the merchant is. That's what's called authorization. All those things I just said doesn't tell you who the actual cardholder is. Authentication does tell you that. So for actual direct payment processing, the future one is authenticating the cardholder. If we authenticate the actual cardholder is doing the purchase, that would indicate not just the card number or static information such as your address or any personable identifiable information, but also identifying, for instance, your browser window and seeing, okay, is this Firefox? Is this Chrome? Is this Opera? Those browsers actually are part of consortiums such as FIDO, where they look at different elements just inside the browser window to send for authentication. So the browser window size, is the form factor on a mobile device, like you just said, or is it a browser window on a desktop? In addition, IP addresses, the ISP is sent. They look at your cardholder patterns for transactions. So authentication really is the future of security, one basic one. The second thing is security for merchants' websites and external connections. So the data actually going over the internet is those type of things we're looking at more and more. It's not just a transaction. If the transaction's all the way secure, but the merchant's website is so lax with security that they just allow people to come with any data from any website, it's kind of useless to protect the transaction. So, in addition, we have standards like PCI, GDPR in Europe, where they go ahead and actually look at all those things. Are you securing your connections? Are you making sure your employees are safe? Or are you going ahead and looking at your transaction patterns, making sure that you're not having, for instance, 3,000 attempts on your servers at 3 a.m. in the morning, and no one checks in to see, okay, why did that occur? Even if transactions aren't run, the merchant should be checking up on these things. So it's a holistic effort. It can't be always reactive, is the easiest thing to say. And a lot of the future is in that proactive work, securing the merchant's end before any type of fraud happens. Third thing, while it's not a positive, it's something that as students and as future employees in fintech, we need to observe is deregulation, particularly at the federal level. We're seeing a lot of technology come in with artificial intelligence, with financial products, fintech companies coming in and joining with smaller banks and such. And it's kind of like the airline industry in the late 70s, early 80s. The regulation is coming in at the same time, making it easier for these fintech companies to come into the ecosystem, but they're not taking compliance and those like security as serious as they can. So with that deregulation, with less intervention from organizations like the CFPB or at a federal level, the people who are in fintech need to understand they have to pay attention to cybersecurity more and more, and to go further than what simply compliance or even baseline regulation like PCI gives you.
All right, folks. I'm going to open up for questions. Thoughts? So, what do you think about fraud or security features in the payments industry? Anybody? And I know you had some comments. I saw you in the chat session. So, if you want to chime in, what's your thoughts about our discussion today?
Uh, hey, hi, Corey.
Hello.
Hi,
Hi,
Anai.
Dr. Sophia. Um,
Good.
this is really exciting to me. I'm just trying to soak in and absorb all of the terminology. Um,
I know
yeah.
there's a
I
lot to
was
learn, right? I mean, you're
I would
talking
say
about
not even
20
the I was not even say the terminology. Like, for instance, how many of you have just simply dealt with any type of fraud? Having
I
your credit
mean,
card stolen, or go ahead and like
mhm.
just a transaction out of the blue that you see on your credit card statement, you have no idea. Just like I was saying, text messages that come in constantly, um, all those type of weird
Mhm.
spam texts that you get. Any of you actually seeing things like this?
Yes, yeah, and when you were talking about how you just shouldn't respond to them, I'm that person that will respond and be like, "No, I don't know you. Stop talking to me." But I don't think about just don't interact with them
No,
or
you know
Yeah,
what?
yeah,
I have
all
fun
the
with those
links.
guys, actually, honestly. The last conversation was somebody from Amazon. They're
Yes,
from
yeah.
Amazon, and they said their account is having some issues. Then they asked me to give the information in, right?
Yes.
So you could hear back as a call center. I mean, I knew the guy was a fraud. So I kept
Mhm.
engaging with him and talking to him. Then finally I told him, I say, hey, your wife's here with me, you know?
and Nick, you like those things where like back in the day we would see them. They had call centers where they would actually just call and robocall and start the
Yes.
scam, and it's
Uh-huh.
like, but even those are getting more sophisticated now because
Yes.
even if you're talking, just like we're talking, you call, you pick up the phone, hey, who is this? And they start talking to you.
Yeah.
They can take snippets of your phone call and actually use generative AI in order to go ahead and recreate your voice later on.
Exactly.
That's the reason why you don't engage. You don't go ahead and even respond anymore.
Oh
I know
my
what you're talking about. I watch the YouTube channels where they actually respond and
I
talk
have
to
fun
these
with them.
guys.
Honestly,
I
I
love
do
it.
have a lot of. Yeah, it's
But
just a fun thing. But I'm just going to let y'all know, folks. I mean, do y'all know how many credit cards I have? Anybody? Take a guess. And I've been in the industry for 26 years, right? So think about this.
I was gonna
20,
say 20. Yeah.
0.
0.
yeah,
No, 0.
he said credit cards.
I didn't say debit
Now,
cards. I said credit cards.
yeah, exactly. That's the one thing a lot of people don't know is that even though we always say credit cards, debit cards are by far more popular because every single checking account gets a debit card now.
Mhm.
All your prepaid cards are debit. They don't work on a type of like credit line. So, yeah, I can believe you have 0 credit cards.
So you know what I do when I travel? I have American Express prepaid card. Okay.
Mhm.
So when I travel out of town, I would add $100 at a time, transfer from my bank account to American Express prepaid. So the money goes low and I keep adding. That way, if it gets fraud, guess what? I lose $100. So that's what I've been using for years. Right?
And
Obviously. Go ahead. And
even that is a data point that we look at in order to go ahead and see customer's account. How often do they deposit into their account?
yeah,
Are they keeping their account at their normal levels or not? They also look at that for merchants for what's basically not so much friendly fraud, but if you have bad actors. I know Nick's been trying to mention this or once or twice, but Match.
mhm,
MasterCard has a system where every
yeah,
single acquirer and issuer, not just the ones that are MasterCard ones, but on all the different card networks. So Visa, MasterCard, Discover, American Express, we can send in that data and say, hey, this merchant, they had a fraud attack where we suspect that it was insider fraud, or they were hit with so many different disputes that we had to deactivate them.
yeah,
Um, they have directors who are on the OFAC list. In other words, they're being possibly sanctioned.
hmm
So all these type of things are put into Match, and they actually check those merchants daily in some cases. Check those lists in order not just when they originally sign up, but over the years to make sure that a merchant's not a bad actor.
exactly.
So
So Caleb had got a question here. He said, "How can I get rid of my credit card? You got to pay it off. That's the only way to do it."
it's I don't want to discourage anybody from having credit cards, but you got to use it responsibly. You
Yeah,
got to pay it off. It's actually good to use your credit card if you're paying off the balance
yeah,
in at least a 2-month time period.
hmm
But I'll tell you this, I hate to say it, but you can't avoid using the credit card system at this point. Even if you don't have a regular credit card, you're going to use a debit card in some manner or
yeah,
use it on a phone. We're even getting to a point talking about future technology where credit card numbers, as you know 'em, will no longer be useful because tokenization. So we're getting to a point where the card networks might not even give you a credit card when you get a credit card number when you get a card. It's just going to be a credit card number with the data points necessary to algorithmically give you a token when it sends into the network.
Okay, I have a question for the class. Corey, you don't have to answer this yet. So you walk up to the gas station and you pay for certain item, drinks, and then you see this sign there, $3 added to your card for processing, right? There's a processing surcharge for credit or debit. Is that legal or illegal? Class, can they add surcharge to your card or make you pay for the processing fees?
No one?
No
Mm,
one? Come on.
isn't that the way they get the money?
Yeah,
Like,
I was
isn't
gonna
that the
say,
way
I'm
they?
pretty.
No, no, no. Think about this. What I'm saying, right? If it's certain items, you walk in, you've seen this, right? You walk into a gas station,
Mm-hmm.
the guy said, okay, there'll be a sign there. Anything less than $10, you got to pay a certain amount, right?
I've seen it.
One.
Yep.
Okay. Or the merchant makes you go to certain restaurants now, they do that too.
Yes.
I'm going to tag on certain processing fees for that. Is that legal or illegal?
Well, the way you're saying it, maybe it's illegal.
I don't know. Yes, I'm asking you.
Then there's
That's
me like, okay, because sometimes you don't carry. Well, I'm just saying, like, whether it's legal or illegal, for me personally, if I don't have cash, I'm just paying the $3. But I have
Yeah.
seen that. I have seen that where
okay.
they've
This
actually
is
charged you.
becoming more prevalent. Yes, it's
Yes.
becoming more and more. All right. So I'll let the expert answer that. Go ahead, Corey.
The expert's going to tell everyone that I've seen executives, including the executives at Visa, tear their hair out over this question.
Yes.
Because what Nick said, even the setup gas station, this is something where if you're driving down the road and you see a gas station sign and they say cash $2.90, credit
Mm-hmm.
$3.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually completely legal, and it was legal because of a federal law made in 1975 and basically made permanent in 1983. So that's legal. But
Mm-hmm.
when you go inside,
Mm-hmm.
if they go ahead and basically say, "Hey, we're going to charge you 3% on your debit card,"
Mm-hmm.
that's illegal, actually.
Yeah, guys. So remember, debit card. They cannot do that. I
Right.
fought with so many gas stations, and I told them, I said, guys, if you're gonna do this, I'm gonna call Visa. They're gonna shut you down right now,
So
and they
dual,
can't do that.
Oh,
you got to
wow.
be careful because there's a lot. What I would tell everybody is to do the research, especially for where you live. And if you really want to look up more information on this, look up credit card surcharging
Mm-hmm.
and look into it's a lot. You're seeing a lot of lobbying right now at state levels in order to either make it illegal or to go ahead and put more controls on it. Unfortunately, we're seeing more junk fees where they don't call it a surcharge, but they, for instance, like Nick said, a service fee, or hey, we're charging an 18% gratuity, or we're going cashless and we're charging you. All these type of things are illegal, or they fall
Mm-hmm.
very close to being illegal, where they're so unfriendly to the consumers.
Mm-hmm.
Visa at a certain point last year was charging $5,000 on the first offense if
Mm-hmm.
they found it to be egregious. So another thing is, if this really annoys you, even if you make the payment, contact your bank and say, "Hey, the merchant on this transaction, they forced me to go ahead and pay a credit card surcharge on my debit card."
Yes, exactly. So why does it apply for credit only and not debit class?
Because of regulation. This goes back
Yeah.
to what we're talking about with fraud, is that there's basic regulation. For instance, Nick knows this, Regulation E. In the I can't remember which law, but if you look up Regulation E class, that will show you a lot of the basic things that protects consumers on payment processing. For instance, how quickly we have to respond to a dispute, who has to respond to a dispute, how much money you are protected. A lot of people know that, hey, for a certain amount on a debit card, they're going to protect you up to a certain amount, and that's it. Well, the reason why is because of these laws. So these things are covered under regulations at a federal level, also at a state level, and even at municipal levels. New York and California are the biggest drivers of regulations for payment processing outside the federal government. And New York, for instance, has laws on how a surcharge should be done and how it should be shown on the receipt, and what's called dual pricing, where you can charge more for credit than for cash. But there's a lot of rules around this. So one big thing I would say is, if this conversation interests you about fraud and cybersecurity, I say learn more also about compliance in of itself in the payment industry, because
Exactly.
drives the minimal viable product, the MVP, on how strictly a lot of these companies look at fraud. So, in order to go ahead and prepare yourselves when you get into industry, you have to fight projects, even when you're in cybersecurity. Know the basic laws and compliance regulations first. That way, you can go ahead and say, it behooves us to do this because we're just simply being compliant. Also, one last thing is that fraud, a lot of times, unfortunately, unless you have a specific product you're selling, is not a revenue driver. So a lot of times businesses or even executives at large companies, they do the minimum on fraud and cybersecurity because they think it's not generating a profit.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to look at this from a holistic perspective. For instance, what I said earlier, this is a real life example. A merchant lost $105,000 over the last 6 months over, I think it was only 14 transactions. And they are a travel agency, online travel agency. So one of the things they haven't been doing is authenticating the cardholder, making sure it's the actual cardholder with the card data. And since they haven't been doing this, they didn't get that liability shift that protects them if they have a cardholder who's just using stolen data. So if they had authenticated the cardholder, it would cost 10 cents a transaction. That's it. They lost $100,000 because they wouldn't pay 10 cents a transaction to protect themselves. So,
Corey, I'm sorry. There's a question here. What do you recommend for those who want to break into AML fraud detection for payment processing? That's about Dennis.
Exactly what I said earlier. Start to look into certifications and into even college courses that deal with AML and know your customer regulations. Understand the regulations because the regulations will actually teach you the vectors of fraud that are already out there, how they are occurring, and what the different governments, whether it's a state government or federal, are doing to protect themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Also, go ahead and look at international financial organizations or regulators, such as the FCAC in Canada or the FCA in England, because a lot of their regulations are stronger against fraud, and they let you know a lot more about how the government views AML and KYC protection.
Mm-hmm. All right. Do we have one more question? Thoughts? Anybody to close out? Now, do me a favor and go hit all the gas stations and all the places where they're trying to scam you. Okay, just all you got to do.
I'm not worried about that, Nick. I'm not worried. Now, if you told them to go to the dark web and buy as many credit card numbers as they wanted or something like that, much more worried.
Well, you can probably get $1 a piece, right, for credit cards at the dark web, I'm sure. But
Less than
remember, but remember,
Yeah.
the government is watching you, so whatever you do. All right, folks. I think we're going to close out today. Thank you so much, Corey. Appreciate you taking the time.
It was
Right,
a
and
pleasure.
we have another session coming up soon, right, for tokenization. So that'll be an
Yep.
interesting topic. That is fun, right? I think
Ties
I like
in
tokenization.
directly to this.
Exactly. So it's just going to carry over to our conversation about security too at the same time. But
Yep.
thank you so much, folks. I appreciate you all. Corey, if you want to stay back and we can have a quick conversation.
All right.
Thank you all. Have a nice day.
Psst. Hey, guys.
Hello. I think they were sleeping though.
Oh, no.
So we met. The investor came today. Two investors actually from
Okay.
Brazil, and he is very interested with our program. And
Very good.
he wants to connect. He's Brazilian, So he
Mhm.
wants to connect with me with a couple of universities in Brazil. And then on top of that, he wants to also invest in the hackathon.
That's actually a pretty good idea if you're going to go international to target, for instance, Brazil.
Yeah, because
To look at Brazil and Africa, Nigeria is always a big one as far as for the credit card industry.
mhm.
Of course, any of the what you call it, Middle Eastern, Emirates might produce some stuff, especially like anything from Qatar.
See, I tried to talk to King Fahd University in Saudi, but they don't want to talk to me because we don't have face to face. So they said until we get face to face, they don't want to engage with us. And those guys are loaded to the max. You know.
There's no way to get a face to face with them.
No, I'm talking about until we come up with a face to face program at Kennesaw State.
Oh, as far as
Yeah.
okay, until you
Mhm.
come up with a face to, I'm like, why would it be hard to do it? Okay, so
Yeah. So they want face to face engagement. So if we were to do that program, they say they'll be able to send students over here, or we can take trips over there, right?
yeah, that actually is a why wouldn't the well, I could talk about it at another time. I would just say it behooves the university to think about a
Yeah,
face-to-face program.
yeah, I'm
Um,
talking about that to John. Can you drop off the call, please? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Uh, so, so yeah, that's the plan, right? I'm working with them and trying to build my case.
Mhm.
So what we're doing right now is more on the weekly calls, but I'm trying to build my case. So I'm going to do my survey to get my audience and say, okay, here, this is what the class thinks about face to face because we're having weekly calls,
Right.
and 90% of our students are here in the metro side. So if I can put all the numbers together, do some survey, take you to the dean and say, hey, they want face to face. We'll offer the online, but we still won't have to do face to face,
Because I
right?
think, especially for those Middle Eastern countries, with the environment the way it is for students and traveling, they'd be more receptive to sending students over, and you wouldn't have as many issues with like visas or anything. So
Exactly.
that's
They
also
don't have
another.
any problems, man. Between, Japan is coming in, so we signed the deal
Yeah,
already. Yeah.
yeah. You told me
So,
that.
so
Congratulations.
thanks. So they're coming in next end of August to do everything.
Okay.
So Japan is easy to get the visa to come. I mean, easiest country,
Right.
right? Japanese students don't stay back; they usually go back. Saudi is the same way. Why would they want to stay here when they got money over there, right?
Brazil.
So
Brazil's a large economy. They're not going to mess with Brazil.
yeah,
So that's
yeah,
another good one.
yeah.
Um, so I would say a face-to-face program just is invest in an adjunct professor. Go
Hmm.
ahead and get them in the space and start with face-to-face or a couple adjuncts. But you don't even have to hire a full-time professor if you don't want to.
This is why I've been telling Humayun. I say, Humayun, we need to change the way we engage now. I say you're bringing folks straight from college. I
Right.
said you need to have a balance. I say we are lacking there right now. The only practicing professors is me and Animate from Visa.
what the what the student asked earlier about how do I learn about compliance and such like that,
Mhm.
that's actually something that maybe they should look at bringing in as far as a college level program or in the masters,
Mhm.
because a lot of that stuff, especially the federal laws and such, the international ones, if you have a face-to-face program with international students, you could teach those students all the international regulations, how they
Yeah,
intertwine, the how that relates to security, cybersecurity, how that ties into how you want to design AI databases in
yeah,
order to go ahead and one of the biggest things is also medical, and also real estate. Trying to
yeah.
look at those regulations and design payment systems for that. So all these things, just to say, like you said, you got to target the professional students, the ones that
Mhm.
are going back for their master's